Welcome to episode 58 of A Game of Thrones Abridged on Alt Swift X. Today we are reading Sansa 5, A Game of Thrones, and this will probably be a briefer episode than some of the recent ones. We've been going like 60, 90 minutes sometimes recently, which is fun, but also it can be nice to, keep it short and sweet, keep it, concise, keep it, little morsel, sometimes a small morsel can be more satisfying than a gigantic protracted meal, don't you think? Like in all the restaurants when they put like a fancy tasty food and they put like a really little amount of it in a gigantic plate, just this gigantic white canvas with this tiny little. Sometimes it can be nice, sometimes, but we'll see how it goes. So this chapter's about the ascension of King Joffrey to the throne of Westeros. We've seen the death of one king, Robert Baratheon, and this is the rise of a second, Joffrey, first of his name, long may he reign. And this chapter is from the perspective of Sansa, who is somewhat disconcerted by the change of affairs, by the imprisonment of her father, by the disappearance of the rest of her family, by Arya running away. So this is Sansa trying to cling on to some sense that everything's going to be okay. So thank you very much for the donation from Tribute to Trivium. We've got a new system worked out for the super chat. So the way it's going to work now is that you see down in the bottom right screen, all of the donations are listed there. So in some cases we might not interrupt the chat to thank people during the stream. What we'll do is you'll be in the bottom right corner of the screen, and then at the end I'll answer all your comments and questions. I think that's a good way to do it. So if you do make a super chat thingy, you will get your question answered at the end, and you will be thanked, but it might happen at the end as opposed to in the middle, because we are rejigging the bells and whistles here on this vehicle that we call Alt Swift X. We've got the little streamers on the handlebars. We're sort of adjusting the color, the sort of training wheels. We're sort of clicking the gears. We're reworking the chain. We're just sort of, altering the vehicle to make sure it runs smoothly, So that's what we've done with some adjustments to the UI. So hopefully this will be a prettier, faster, tastier vehicle for everybody. That is the goal. So the chapter begins with a description of the walls of the throne room. In the show, the walls of the throne room are pretty nondescript. I think they're just what you'd call, walls. They're just sort of bare. They're just sort of there. They're here and there. They're walls. But in the books, the walls are actually pretty important symbolically to represent what's going on politically in Westeros. So, like back in the Targaryen days, the walls of the throne room had dragon skulls on them. All of the skulls of all the Targaryen dragons, at least the ones that were recovered, were displayed along the walls of the hall, which on one hand is like very impressive and formidable to show, hey, look, we're the Targaryens, we have dragons, don't fuck with us. But on the other hand, it doesn't so much say we have dragons so much as we had dragons, because of course for the latter half of the Targaryen dynasty, the Targaryens had no dragons no more because they died during the dance. So the skulls didn't so much represent Targaryen strength so much as they represented Targaryen former glory, right? So in that respect, it's perhaps less impressive to witness the decline of the Targaryens by their dragon skulls. But anyway, so that was what was on the walls of the throne room for years. When Robert Baratheon came into power, he took down all the dragon skulls from the walls and chucked them in the basement instead to rot, to moulder, to gather dust, and to scare children like Arya Stark when she stumbles onto them. And after taking down the dragon skulls, he replaced the skulls on the walls with some hunting tapestries, because Robert is a big fan of hunting. He's like a teenage girl who, gets a new room and puts up some posters of the Justin the Beeb, and some little butterfly dangly things, and like some of those fairy lights as well strung up across the wall, and lots of little posters and like carefully arranged photos, printed out from Instagram. Do people still print things out? Probably not. But Robert just pasted some pictures of his hashtag favorite things onto the walls. That's what Robert's doing with these pictures of the hunting tapestries. So it's perhaps less, politically significant, the hunting tapestries. It doesn't have quite the same, rich symbolism or gangster decor as dragon skulls. Is that how you describe the sort of feng shui of the dragon skulls? Sort of gangster decor. That's the kind of vibe I get from the skulls of reptile monsters on your walls. The hunting tapestries are more just like, here's a pretty picture because it's slightly more interesting than a bare wall. That's kind of what the hunting tapestries communicate. But that is what Robert had up. But now we have yet another new regime. We have another new king. And now this means some new wall decorations. That's what's really it's a bit like, I know I said we wouldn't talk about politics, but you know how everyone pays a great deal of attention to what kinds of decorations are in the White House, in the American presidential room. Everyone pays a lot of attention to what kinds of Bieber posters the various presidents hang up, because remember when Trump came in, there was all this talk about which little statues he had and which he didn't. If I recall, there was some storm in a teapot controversy over whether there was a bust of Martin Luther King in there or something like that. Maybe it wasn't him. But the point is that people pay a lot of attention to what kinds of decorations politicians use, because the symbolism is very real and very potent, and so the symbolism here is very relevant when we are told that on the first line of this chapter, we've been analyzing just the first line of this chapter so far, and the hunting tapestries that King Robert loved so much have been taken down and stacked in a corner in an untidy heap, which is to represent that Robert Baratheon's regime, Robert Baratheon's dynasty, has been taken down and abandoned in the corner in an untidy heap. That also represents the downfall of Robert, just as the removal of the Targaryen dragon skulls indicated the fall of the Targaryen regime. It's like Ozymandias, innit? It's like Ozymandias, how that broken statue in the desert that says look on ye mighty in despair, because you look at the ruins of some former power and go, wow, I could fall too. That's what Ozymandias is about. And these hunting tapestries on the ground, look on my untidy heap of hunting tapestries, ye mighty and despair. It doesn't roll off the tongue as well. That's probably why Blake or whoever used a broken statue instead. But the effect is the same. When you look at these fallen tapestries, you're like, well, if they can come down, anything can come down. And Joffrey is doing some redecorating. So that's the first line analysed. Let's move on to the second line. The second line is that Sir Mandon Moore is standing amongst the other blokes of the King's Guard. Mandon Moore's the guy who Cersei, or somebody, later persuades to attempt to kill Tyrion on the Blackwater, which he isn't successful in doing. You'd think that would sound like the easiest assassination job in the world, killing a dwarf in the middle of a busy battle. You'd think that would be pretty straightforward. But Tyrion, let's be honest, has some plot armor, or more pertinently, he has Podrick Payne, and Podrick Payne, he brings the pain, to that. He really does. He brings pain to the mid lane, and he puts a spear through Mandon Moore's head. But that's a book away. I wouldn't get too concerned about that. The point is that Mandon Moore is standing amongst the rest of the King's Guard. And so Sansa, meanwhile, has been given freedom of the castle. So she's no longer being locked up in her room anymore by Cersei, who's running the keep now. She's allowed to wander around, but she's escorted everywhere she goes. Honor guards the Queen calls them, but they do not make Sansa feel honoured. So the point is that Sansa is a hostage here. She's a hostage to make sure that the Starks don't get up to any skullduggery, hijinks, capers, and so Sansa is being guarded day and night. So I mean, the comparison that's the little symbolism that's often used with Sansa is the idea of a bird. She's often called a little bird, and in this case, the little bird is caged. She's enclosed within this small space, and she's sort of flitting about within the cage, just going, "Oh golly, I sure hope they give me some seeds. I'm a bird. I love seeds." Or maybe that's where the analogy breaks down. That's an abuse of the analogy. Sorry, analogy. Get well soon. So, freedom of the castle. So, the idea of freedom is very relevant to Sansa. It's a theme with her. Is she able to move to where she wants to move? Is she able to be who she wants to be? She's constantly been under someone's bloody control throughout the series. Often Cersei, sometimes Littlefinger. And so there's a bunch of blokes at court. We're at court, just like the image shown in the video. We're at court, and Joffrey is holding the court. He is being crowned king, and everyone's hanging out. Janos Slynt is out there amongst the gold cloaks, the guy who betrayed Ned. And also Sansa thinks of Arya. She hasn't completely forgotten her younger sister. Sansa thinks of Arya and goes... Actually, no, she doesn't think of Arya yet. Sorry, no, she doesn't think of Arya yet. What she actually thinks is, if I, Sansa, could leave the castle, where would I go? What would I do? And so she seems pretty sort of helpless with the idea of going out on her own and trying to make it on her own. Whereas, I mean, compare that to Arya. When Arya realized in her chapter that she had to run away out of the Red Keep, she immediately was thinking like, all right, what's my itinerary? What's my agenda? What have I got to bring on the trip? Check, check, check. Warm clothes, sword, kill a butcher's boy. Like, damn, not a butcher's boy, a stable boy. Like Arya, she knows exactly what to do. Like, bam, 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 military efficiency. Because she's so pragmatic, she's so on the ball. Sansa, on the meanwhile, is like, if I left the castle, what would I go? Oh, it's probably better if I just stay and pick some flowers in Myrcella's garden. So Sansa in that respect is rather less impressive than Arya. Arya is all about like the practical steps to get shit done, while Sansa is still thinking about Myrcella's garden and smelling flowers. So come on, man, like pick up the pace. Is what we feel for her. But this is the first court session of Joffrey's reign. This is the first big meeting, the first big moment when Joffrey, as a politician, as a Machiavellian politician, stands up and asserts his power as the new king of Westeros. And so all the lords are around, the gold cloaks are around, the Kingsguard are around, and Sansa is among them, is among all of these lords and these petitioners, and she just sort of says hello to a bunch of them politely, and she mentions some of the people who are around. There's Jellibar Zio, who is one of the Summer Islander guys who was a mate of Robert's. There's Aaron Santigar, the Master at Arms. There's the Redwine twins, Horror and Slobber, Horus and whatever the other one's name is, and there's Lord Giles, and everyone treats her as though she's got the plague. Everyone stays away, because of course she's like a political untouchable at this point. She is the daughter of the man labeled traitor Eddard Stark. So everyone doesn't want to be associated with her for fear of being labeled a bloody traitor themselves. So Sansa is not too happy with being treated like a leper like this. And so people are treating her weirdly, but also a lot of people are absent. A lot of people are missing. So she looks for friendly faces and can't find them. Because, of course, there's been a bit of a purge lately, a bit of a good old-fashioned purge. Presumably Cersei, ordered the death of rather a lot of people all over the castle. People like Vayon Poole. Basically, all of the Stark men, anyone associated with Ned Stark, anyone under the command of Ned Stark, and anyone else who might have looked at Cersei funny, has been killed in the Red Keep recently, in order to assert Joffrey's power over Ned's. And so that means that a lot of Sansa's former allies and comrades have been murdered so these friendly faces are absent from the crowd. She feels like a ghost, Sansa says, dead before her time, which is, on the one hand, something we can be sympathetic for, but on the other hand, Theon is the real ghosty man, right? I mean, Theon becomes the ghost of Winterfell later on, and he's the one who really fucking suffers. I mean, not that human suffering is a dick measuring contest. Too often in this age of measurable Facebook likes, human suffering becomes a dick measuring contest where everyone's like, my suffering's more legitimate than your suffering, and that's not good for anyone. But let's be real. If anyone's a ghost, it's more Theon than Sansa. But we'll get to that one day when we get to those later books. Thank you to Angela Smith for the kind donation. And so Pycelle is around. He's apparently asleep. And Varys is here, and Baelish is here. These three are like the most slimy of politicians, these three. And yet they are the three who survived the Great Purge. Where were you when the Purge happened? Everyone remembers where they were when the Purge happened. I myself was a young whippersnapper of the... Yeah, whatever. And so Balon and Sir Dontos are around, and Sansa is afraid, as you would be. Sansa's this young girl, a bunch of her friends have been killed, her father's in prison, she's afraid, but she's telling herself everything's going to be okay because Joffrey loves me and the Queen loves me, so everything is going to be okay. So Sansa is very much upset by all of the terrible things that have happened recently, but she's still clinging to the faith that everything's going to be okay in the end. Spoiler, it's not, but that's where Sansa is at the moment. And so we get the Herald. They often don't do the heralds in the show. They often try to cut out a lot of the sort of campy medieval trappings in the HBO show. But in the books we have heralds, who are blokes who are employed by virtue of the volume of their lungs. Men whose job it is to talk. Almost like a certain Alt-Swift X. Their job is just to speak. But in the case of the heralds, being concise is perhaps even more of a requirement for a medieval herald than it is for a person who talks on the internet. And so the herald is pretty concise when he says, "All hail His Grace Joffrey. King Joffrey, King Joffleberry, King Joffsby, Little Joffston, Joffle Jafflebean. All hail King Jafflebean, king of all the places and the first men and the seven of the kingdoms, blah blah blah. King Joffrey is king," is what the herald says. So everyone's terribly excited about that. But importantly, we also mention Queen Regent Cersei Lannister. She also gets some titles herself. So she's not only Queen Regent now, she's also Protector of the Realm, which just comes along with being Regent apparently, and she's also Light of the West. Which is a curious title. No one seems to know exactly what it means, but I think it probably just means that Cersei's from the West, and she's really pretty and blonde, and so that's why they call her the Light. Probably something like that. I mean, let's be honest, they're not going to be going and calling Tywin Lannister Light in the West. They're not going to be calling Ned Stark Light of the North. I think it's just a way of saying, you've got shiny blonde hair and you're quite pretty. Therefore, we'll give you a title, Light of the West. Isn't that great? But yeah, meanwhile, Barristan Selmy is hanging out. And you gotta wonder, is Barristan Selmy cool with all this? How does Barristan Selmy feel? Because Barristan Selmy, of course, witnessed the coup when it happened, when Ned Stark rocked up and said, "Yo, I've got the King's will and it says that I'm the regent now." And then bloody Queen Cersei ripped the paper. Is this supposed to be your shield, Lord Stark? She ripped up the paper. She broke the king's own words, which is about as treasonous as you can really get. And Barristan, as we all know, is about as much of a stickler for the rules as anybody. He does it by the book, damn it. And so he shouldn't be too happy about this whole King Joffrey, Queen Cersei regime change. But here he is, standing here, just rolling with it. not betraying any concern, though of course I think internally he'd be very concerned. But anyway, so Sansa's like, oh, and here's the Joffikins himself. It's little Joffleberry. It's the J Bear. It's the J Boy. It's JJ. It's JJ Barry himself. You know, it's JB. It's JB. Joff. It's the Joff. It's the one and only. It's your man. It's your boy. The best teeth in the game. It's King Joffrey. So Sansa's very impressed by his dress. Sansa spends a whole paragraph describing Joffrey's clothes. The food descriptions of Sansa chapters is clothes descriptions. So that sort of goes on. Let's just skip through the clothes description. All of the pages that are full of clothes descriptions. And now we'll get to the bit where Joffrey speaks for the first time as King Joffrey. One note though, so Nathan Diskin asks an interesting question, which is, does Light of the West have anything to do with the Daenerys prophecy about the sun rising in the west and setting in the east? So Cersei in this chapter has the title Light of the West, which does seem as though it might be connected to the whole Daenerys prophecy of you will not bear a child and you will not, and Drogo will not be back to normal until the sun rises in the west and sets in the east, which is just basically a way of saying never. A lot of people take that whole Mirri Maz Duur speech as like some kind of convoluted prophecy, and you know, maybe if George Martin really wants to play with us, he could do some kind of symbolic thing that represents the things that Mirri Maz Duur says, and thereby then makes Drogo come back to life again, because that's what Mirri was talking about, right? So look, I don't think it's very likely that Mirri's words there should really be taken as a prophecy, and as such, I don't think they're necessarily related to the Light of the West title. But hey, who knows? George Martin does some fruity things, and he's been spending a lot of time writing these books, so he's probably had the time to think of every silly little possibility like that. So hey, who knows? But yeah, thanks for the point there. And so the king speaks for the first time as king, and he says it is a king's duty to punish the disloyal and blah 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 blah. So he just sort of says what is clearly a sort of pre-written sort of thing. He just says the thing that he's expected to say, and then Pycelle reads a list. This is like Santa Claus's naughty list of kids who will be receiving coal. These are all of the boys and girls in Westeros who have been naughty and who will be receiving only coal. You know, Santa Claus used to eat people, by the way. Just so you know. Just in case you're not aware, Santa Claus used to eat people. Because, I mean, like, it's a recent thing that he was all sort of like, you know, fuzzy and friendly in Coca-Cola Red, apparently. But I think I heard that before those days, Santa Claus was a pretty gnarly bloke. He was like this folk legend, like mythological boogeyman. And you know, if you were good, he'd give you like a ratchet spanner or something, because you know, gifts were more utilitarian back then. You weren't getting any bloody Cadbury favourites in the 14th century. You were getting, you know, you were getting a hacksaw or a rock or something useful, you know. But if it wasn't that, that was if you were good. That was if you were lucky. If you were bad, if you were a bad naughty boy, Santa Claus would just straight up fucking eat you. He didn't give a shit. He hasn't got no time. Like, what's he gonna do? Distribute coal to every naughty person? Like, do you know how much time that would take? You know how many naughty children there are in the world? I mean, less in the 14th century, admittedly. But Santa just doesn't have the logistic network in order to transport that much coal. I mean, if you're transporting, I mean, let's be conservative and say you'll give a 300-gram chunk of coal to every naughty person in the world. That's still millions of tons of coal. Millions of tons, right? And so how's he gonna get that? It's way easier just to eat them. Way easier just to eat the children. If ever you're having logistical problems, just ask yourself, would this problem be solved if I just ate the children? Don't ever write off that possibility. That's all I'm gonna say. And so Joffrey is getting Pycelle to read the naughty list. Everyone in Westeros who's suspected of being not quite loyal to the king is being told that you have to come and kneel before the king or die. You have to come and declare that Joffrey is your king and that you are loyal, or else you will have your lands taken away and you'll be branded a traitor and you will be killed. So he lists all of the naughty children. He lists little Stanny Boy, little Stannis Baratheon, little Rendog, little Rensby, Renly Baratheon. He mentions the Royces, he mentions the Tyrells, Loras and Mace, he mentions Thoros of Myr and Beric Dondarrion, who were out in the Riverlands, Sir Brynden, Sir Edmure, Jason Mallister, Bryce Caron, Walder Frey, all these people in the Riverlands, the bloody Martells in Dorne. Joffrey's listing basically everyone who's important, whose loyalty isn't already certain, and saying, yo, you got to turn up here and kneel, or I'll chop off your head. Which is probably, a good way to assert your power at the beginning of a realm, at the beginning of a reign. It's just to make absolutely clear that, yep, I am in charge. Everyone's acknowledging me, and so then we can move on. But it does, of course, betray a certain insecurity, doesn't it? Like you wouldn't be dragging everyone in front of you to assert your power if it weren't that your power wasn't in some kind of question. And of course, it is in question at this point, because everyone's aware that there's been some fuckery going on with Ned and the sudden death of Robert, and Stannis is also out there, and I think many people know that Stannis is contending for the throne at this point, and Renly also is gathering swords. So everyone's aware that there's some unrest, or people would be aware that there's some unrest, and so there's insecurity, there's uncertainty, so Joffrey's trying to end it by dragging everyone to kneel before him. Thank you, Dustin Kinsey, for your donation, and we'll read the question at the end of the stream. And so the Starks, finally, at the end of the list, are read as the naughtiest of all of the naughty children in Westeros. The Stark family are listed one by one: Catelyn, Robb, Brandon, Rickon, Arya, and Sansa. And so these guys are the naughtiest of the naughty children, and Sansa gasps when she hears Arya. So that confirms to Sansa that, oh shit, so the Lannisters, they don't have Arya. She must have escaped. She must be out there somewhere. But on the other hand, it also means that Arya's alive, which Sansa doesn't really think of, but it's pretty significant just the fact that they mention Arya, because if they didn't say Arya's name and Arya wasn't in Lannister custody, that would suggest that Arya is dead. So it's actually a pretty good thing that she's listed there. So Sansa is like, wow, Arya got away, and Sansa figures, so sadly, that since Arya escaped, well, she must have gotten away on the ship that Ned had planned for us, and Arya must be kicking it back at Winterfell by now. She must be just drinking some frosty cocktails, just sitting by the fire, chatting with Bran and Rickon. Arya must be having a jolly old time. Arya must be fine. But the sad reality is that Arya has many, many trials ahead of her before she ever reaches Winterfell again. And yeah, so Pycelle then says, and in place of the traitor Eddard Stark, who used to be Hand of the King, the new Hand of the King is Tywin Lannister, who we met last chapter. And Tywin Lannister, of course, has been Hand of the King before. He was the Hand of the King for King Aerys for some years, and he was one of the better Hands of the King. I mean, not one of the nicer Hands of the King, but certainly one of the more competent and officious. So Tywin Lannister has returned after the brief time in Robert's reign, and now he's the new Hand of the King to run things once more. And of course, being Hand of the King makes you incredibly politically powerful, probably more powerful than the King, certainly at this point when the King is a child, a little blonde Bieber like Jaffleby. Next page. And so we're also told that Stannis Baratheon is a traitor now. So Stannis Baratheon is out of the good books, and Queen Cersei is now going to be seated on the small council in Stannis's place. So Cersei also has a fair amount of official political power now, which is nice for her. And there's a bit of murmuring. I wonder if people are murmuring about the fact that Cersei's a woman on the small council, because women usually aren't represented in that way. And we also talk about Janos Slynt. So Janos Slynt, who of course is a bit of a toad, a bit of a gross human being. I mean, if you did rank every human being in the world, fictional ones as well, and if you ranked them in order of like how much of a top bloke they were, how much of a good person they were, Janos Slynt would come right about 18 billionth. We're including fictional characters, so it's quite a long list. But the point is, he's pretty low down on the list of like great people. But his betrayal, his nastiness, was in service of House Lannister, in service of the new regime, and so accordingly, Janos Slynt is rewarded. Janos Slynt is given the status of a lord, and he's granted the ancient seat of Harrenhal. So Harrenhal used to be held by House Went. But House Went has kicked her clogs at this point, Lady Went, and so the castle's been taken over by Janos Slynt instead. And we talked last episode about how Harrenhal is kind of the defense against the dark arts teaching position of Westeros, in that it is a position that is cursed. If you hold Harrenhal, you're probably gonna die. And yet Janos Slynt is granted the castle to be held by his sons and grandsons forever until the end of time, which is kind of hilarious. Talking about eternity in the case of Harrenhal, who nobody holds for very long. And Janos Slynt also has a seat on the small council. So we're already stacking the small council with incompetence. And the muttering, Sansa notes, this time is louder and angrier. So of course, a lot of the nobility aren't too happy when some random common person gets made into a new lord. Janos Slynt has been raised from being a common person to being a peasant, basically. I mean, not quite a peasant, but like a common person into being a lord. He's an up jump, right? He's like a bloody Gatsby. He's just jumped right up the social strata. And naturally, the other rich people aren't too happy about that. The 1% are never happy when another person joins the 1%, because if too many people join the 1%, the 1% becomes 2% or even 3%, you know? The more you stack the top of the pyramid, the less pointy it gets, you know? And the rich people don't like an unsightly bulge on the top of the pyramid. You know what I'm saying? Like the social strata, right? You don't want it to be too top heavy, you know? You want it bottom heavy. That's how it stays stable. That's why a pyramid is shaped like that. If you tried to put a pyramid, stack it by the point, it'd just fall over like one of those Jewish spinning tops, you know, the dreidel. It's gonna spin around and fall over. You got to keep your pyramid bottom heavy. That's how the rich people feel about the social strata in Westeros. They are unhappy that this random bloke Janos is apparently one of them now. And so Janos Slynt, however, is very pleased with his sudden lordship, and so he's got himself a heraldry, a symbol, and everything. He's taken a bloody spear, a gold bloody spear, as his sigil, which probably references the spears he used to betray Ned Stark. So it's pretty bloody bold to represent his own treachery in his heraldry. But there you go. And then Barristan Selmy is called forward. So we've just seen one example of bad PR. We're going to see an even worse example of PR. So Cersei drags out Barristan and says, "Yo, look, you've been really great on the Kingsguard all this time, but you know what? It's time to finish up. It's time to retire. You've done a good job. Now you're done." And Barristan's like, "Hang on. What are you talking about?" Kerry Noir. Yeah, Kerry Noir suggests actually a better heraldry for Janos Slynt, suggesting a huge arse on a fart brown field. That actually would be a very appropriate heraldry for Janos Slynt. That's a good one, I think. But Barristan Selmy is dragged out, and they tell him, "You know what, it's time to retire." And Barristan Selmy's like, I literally I took these vows for life. The Kingsguard has always been a lifelong duty. I'm meant to guard the king until my death. What do you mean retire? That's not part of the option. When I joined up to the Kingsguard, I swore never to marry anyone. I swore never to hold lands of my own. So what am I going to do if I'm not the Kingsguard? This is my life. You can't take away my being a Kingsguard. And then Cersei's like, lol, no, I can, though. I can. Because your king died, Robert Baratheon died, you're the Kingsguard, and the king died under your watch, so we're just going to blame you for everything. And so Barristan For he seems to shrink as he stands there, and he looks old. He looks his age for the first time. So it is pretty tragic to see the proud and amazingly proficient and storied and respected Barristan Selmy being belittled like this before everyone by the Queen. And Joffrey accusingly says, "You let my daddy Robert die. You're too old to protect anybody." So Joffrey was for a little while there looking like, he was playing a fairly convincing act of someone who wasn't an absolute turd. But he was a gilded turd, was all he was, really. He might have looked shiny, but scratch off the gild, and a gilded turd, it's still what you got as a turd. Like, I'm sorry, it's just a turd. If you went to like a pawn shop with a gilded turd and you said that it was solid gold, it wouldn't take much investigation. It wouldn't take much experimentation for them to find that actually this isn't a gold nugget. This is a turd, and you wouldn't get much money for it. I've tried. If you go, you can try as many times as you like. A pawn shop will not buy a gilded turd, and that's what Joffrey is at the end of the day. He looks very shiny. He looks very pretty. He is able to say the courtesies some of the times and seem gallant, and make naive girls like Sansa like him. But scratch away the gild, and you'll see that Joffrey was a bit of a shit all along. And so Joffrey wants to get rid of Barristan, and Barristan talks about how, look, this is fucked up. Like, I'm a Kingsguard, and I'm bloody competent. I've served 3 kings, and all of those kings are dead, Littlefinger points out. Barristan was the Kingsguard for Robert Baratheon, and for King Aerys, and for Jaehaerys Targaryen before him. So Barristan is quite old. He's seen some shit. But you want that kind of experience amongst the Kingsguard, and still, implausibly, despite his age, Barristan is still a badass fucking fighter, for what that's worth. And they're also told that the replacement for Barristan as commander of the Kingsguard will be Jaime Lannister. And it, again, is terrible fucking PR, because Jaime Lannister is the Kingslayer. He's Kingsguard, but he killed the king. He's like an example of what Kingsguard should not do. And yet they're using Jaime as the new commander of the Kingsguard, which seems crazy to have the new leader of the Kingsguard be someone who broke their vows. That's fucked up. And it's also crazy with the Barristan thing, because Barristan is really popular among the common people. He's a hero. He's like a celebrity. He's someone really famous in Westeros, and so removing him from the Kingsguard is a fucking terrible PR move, as is putting Jaime as Lord Commander. So bad marketing on the hands of the new Baratheon regime. And then Varys talks about how, well, no, but it's okay, Barristan, like, we'll give you a keep, we'll give you a house, a little retirement village, and we'll give you some servants to look after your every need. And Barristan says, a hole to die in and servants to bury me. I thank you, my lords, but I spit upon your pity. So Barristan is proud and badass to the end. And then Littlefinger makes that jibe at him about a naked knight, and everyone laughs at him. Everyone laughs at Sir Barristan, bold, brave Sir Barristan. And Sansa thinks, oh, that must have really hurt, and her heart went out to the gallant old man. So Sansa's pretty selective in her sympathy, right? Like, she manages not to feel much sympathy for her own sister, Arya, when Arya suffers in various ways at the hands of Joffrey and others. And Sansa has also failed to feel sympathy for people like Jane Poole. Jane Poole being a bit of a more lowborn person than Sansa. When Jane was crying and freaked out, Sansa didn't seem to have much sympathy for her. But here's Barristan the Bold being belittled, and Sansa's heart goes out to Barristan. It seems as though Sansa is less sympathetic towards anyone who isn't of, like, higher social rank, or at least doesn't fit into her conception of, like, the heroes and the songs and the ways things should be, and the noble knights. Hopefully Sansa will reconfigure her sympathy as we go along the series, and hopefully Sansa will start to recognize the humanity of people other than gallant knights and kings and queens. And so the other Kingsguard are around, and then Barristan draws his sword, and he's like, man, I might be like 150 years old, but I could fight the shit out of all of you. I could, pick my teeth with my sword point, and then, surgically remove each of your organs, stack them in a line, all with one swipe of my sword. That's how good of a swordsman I am. And when Barristan says that, he's not fucking around, because Barry is quite a swordsman. And he's got so many amazing lines. He says, here, boy, take my sword, melt it down, and add it to the others on the Iron Throne. And he also says, perhaps Lord Stannis will sit on it, the new sword, when he takes your throne. So, damn. Stannis is Barry's bringing the fucking fire. So he's not only saying, you ain't shit, I'm a great swordsman, suck on this. He's also saying, I think you're such a shit king and such a shit political regime that Stannis Baratheon will probably take your throne. And Stannis does come close when the Blackwater happens. But anyway, Stannis stomps off. And so there's silence. There's shocked silence in the room for a while until Joffrey says, he called me boy. Oh, he talked about my Uncle Stannis too. I don't like Barristan. I'm little Jaffles. I'm unhappy with this. And so Joffrey sounds younger than his years for a moment. So we had Barristan just looking his years for the first time. Now we have Joffrey looking younger than his years. Joffrey is a young man, and he seems even younger when he complains like a little kid in the way that he does. And then he says, I want him seized. So Joffrey decides that he wants to arrest Barristan the Bold, which again, more terrible PR. None of this is good. We just had Barristan Selmy talking about Stannis taking over the Iron Throne in front of the whole court, in front of all these lords, in front of all these petitioners. That's not an idea that you want incepted into the most powerful people at court, right? And yet Barristan the Bold, a hero of the realm, just said that shit about Joffrey being crap, and then stomped out. So this is like terrible, terrible marketing for the new regime. And Varys chats, and Joffrey chats, and Janos Slynt is like, all right, we'll go arrest Barristan Selmy. And we find out later that Barristan kills some of the people who Janos Slynt sends after him. And Barristan stomps off, and he keeps on stomping all the way over to bloody Essos. That's how far Barristan stomps, and he has his own sort of interesting arc about wanting to serve a king successfully, in this case a queen, and we even get Barristan as a POV character in A Dance with the Dragons, Book 5. So Barristan certainly goes on to do some interesting things. With Barristan removed from the Kingsguard, there's now a spare spot in the Kingsguard. There's always 7 of them, because 7 is like a sacred number to the faith of the 7. The Kingsguard was established by Aegon the Conqueror 300 years ago, and so his establishment of 7 people as part of the Kingsguard is sort of a nod to him recognizing the faith of the 7. Aegon, even though he wasn't really an adherent to the faith of the 7, was careful to appease the dominant religion of the land. Because, if you're going to take over Europe, you got to keep the Catholic Church happy. Like, you and the Pope have got to be tight. You got to, call him on the weekends, hang out for some squash. Like, you got to have a good relationship with the Catholic Pope. And that's why Aegon named the Kingsguard 7. And so Sandor Clegane is inducted into the Kingsguard. They say, well, we've got a spare spot on the Kingsguard. Why don't we have the Hound, Sandor Clegane, become a member? Because, I don't know, Joffrey likes him. And again, that's like a terrible idea, because Sandor Clegane, again, is like not someone who you really want as part of your branding. I mean, no offense to Sandor, but he doesn't have the best reputation, and he's got that big old burned face, and so he's not who you really want as the face of your organization. There's a reason why PR people tend to be, sort of pretty, professional-looking people, likable people. Sandor doesn't really tick any of those boxes, and yet they decide to put him on the Kingsguard, the famous, important Kingsguard. And Sandor declares when they induct him into the Kingsguard, all right, whatever, I'll join the Kingsguard, but mate, I'm not swearing vows, I'm not becoming a knight. Because unlike many of the warriors in Westeros, Sandor Clegane is not a knight, and becoming a knight means swearing vows to defend the weak and do a bunch of other things. And Sandor's like, fuck that. Like, I'm not going to pretend that I'm a good guy. I'm a dick, head, and I'm proud of it, you know? I'm a dog. Dog life. Scum pride. Rat king. That's what Sandor Clegane is like. And so he's going to join the Kingsguard, but he's refusing to be a knight, which is crazy. Like, one of the other Kingsguard, Boros Blunt, says, well, the Kingsguard have always been knights. You've got to be a knight to be a member of the Kingsguard. And Sandor's like, fuck it. I'll join your club, but I won't swear your vows. I won't become a knight. And Joffrey and Cersei are cool with that. And so we have, for the first time ever, a Kingsguard member who isn't a knight, which, again, it's breaking tradition. And you need tradition at the start of a new political regime, right? You need the trappings of legitimacy and authority. You need those traditions. Because if you don't have that, one day the peasants will all realize that, hold on a minute, the aristocracy, they aren't representatives chosen by God to lead the people legitimately. They're just other people. They're just humans. They're dressed up in fancy clothes, and they're gilded and all of that, but the aristocracy, the nobility, they're just like you and me. If they can be king, why can't I be king? And then you start getting dangerous ideas like revolution and democracy and Karl Marx, and then everything changes. So in order to prevent that happening in Westeros, in order to prevent some kind of communist revolution, the aristocracy really needs to stick with their traditions, and that includes the Kingsguard being knights. But hey, Cersei and Joffrey don't give a fuck. And so Sansa steps forward. They've done most of the business at court, and now Sansa is stepping forward to speak her piece. And so Sansa walks up, and Sansa talks about her dress, and she's taken care to make herself look beautiful, because, again, one of the only things that Sansa can control, one of the only things that Sansa does have the freedom to influence is her own dress, and so that's something that she focuses on. And then Sansa comes up and says, she comes before the court, and she's afraid and she's nervous to talk in front of everyone, but she's like, I have to do this. She comes out, and she feels beautiful and strong like her mother, and she thinks it's going to be okay because Joffrey loves me, everything's going to be all right. And she steps out, and she says to the court, please, I beg mercy for my father, Eddard Stark. And the Queen and Varys and Peter Baelish are all like, oh, but your father's a traitor. He's a treasonous. Traitor's blood. It's all bad. We can't look after your father. He's a dickhead. But Sansa's like, oh, please. And Sansa gives some pretty good reasons, actually, why Ned shouldn't die. She argues that, well, Ned was King Robert's friend. You all know that he loved Robert. He wouldn't have betrayed him like that. Somebody must have lied to Ned to make him act like that. Something else must have been going on. And also, Ned was using painkillers. Ned was on drugs, on milk of the poppy, and that must have clouded his mind and messed with his decision-making faculties. And because of those reasons I've outlined, I would therefore like you to pardon, not pardon, but at least be merciful towards Ned Stark. So Sansa does manage to get across some pretty legit reasons. She's pretty articulate. She expresses herself pretty well, I would say. She also gives King Jafflesby a shy secret smile just for him, which is perhaps an indication that Sansa's beginning to learn that, hold on, if you're a pretty girl, you can control men, or at least influence them pretty well. If you just give them a shy secret smile, if you just give them a little wink and a nudge in the right place, you can motivate men to do all sorts of things. So I think Sansa's beginning to realize her power in that respect, slowly, in some small way. Which is something, of course, that Cersei does. Like at the Blackwater, Cersei later talks about how, a woman's only weapon, tears aren't a woman's only weapon. The other one is between her legs. So something that's often explored in this series are the different kinds of power that women can have, and how women usually can't have like direct overt power, but in some ways they can have more subtle influence. And one of the different ways that they can have subtle influence is through, sex and seduction and stuff like that. Which of course, is problematic in all sorts of ways, but Sansa is learning to use that power now. They talk about, Varys talks about, a child's faith, such sweet innocence. And Pycelle is arguing, nope, treason is treason, we can't be merciful to traitors. Pycelle, as though he wasn't a traitor himself, he who undermined King Aerys by arguing that Tywin Lannister should come in to sack the city. But anyway, so the conclusion of all this is that Cersei and Joffrey especially, is like, all right, tell you what, you guys, your sweet words have moved me. I am gallant, I am Prince Joffrey, and I acknowledge your plea for mercy, and you know what, if if Ned Stark confesses, if not, Ned Stark is honest that he fucked up and he's a traitor and that I am the king, if Ned confesses, then fine. We'll be merciful. It'll be great, and your father will be fine. But he has to confess. And Sansa says, "Oh, he will. Oh, thank you. Oh, gallant Jafflesby in the sky. Oh, great yellow JB in the sky. Oh, Joffikins, thank you. Thank you. Be merciful to my father. He will confess, and everything is going to be okay." So Sansa at this point is still managing to cling on to the idea that everything's going to be okay, that pretty princes are gallant, that bold knights are deserving of sympathy, that ultimately, if you are just a good girl and the queen loves you, then everything is going to be okay. But that particular wool is going to be pulled from her particular eyes throughout the course of this series. And that is the end of the chapter. So if you've got any burning cues to A, maybe cue them up now. Otherwise, I think we'll draw this episode to a close. So I hope you all guys like the sort of way this video went. I think we're achieving a better balance between paying attention to the live stream chat and not. It's a tricky balance to work out, but I think we're getting better at it. But actually, what we will do is quickly acknowledge the chat donations. So thank you very much to everyone who donated in the chat. So we first had tribute to Trivium, who says happy 58th birthday to old Swift X. The birthdays come irregularly, don't they? What with the somewhat irregular streaming schedule. But thank you for the wishes. We'll have to bake some kind of a birthday cake for old Swift X. Actually, I'm sure Kata would be well equipped actually to do that. But thank you for the birthday wishes. Everyone gets a lolly bag at the end of this birthday party. Angela Smith says, "I heart Swifty." Oh, well, I heart you too, Angela Smith. Dustin Kinsey is happy about 2 live streams in one day. Have you ever DM'd D&D or other tabletops? Think you'd be a great DM? Would you open to DMing a session for patrons? That could be interesting, wouldn't it? Some kind of like live streamed Alt Swift Dungeons and Dragons thing. For those of you who aren't aware, for those of you who aren't hip to the old, the old D20, the old plastic figurines on the tabletop, Dungeons and Dragons could be something kind of fun. If any of you are aware, there's this show called Harmontown, which is this podcast that's also done live sometimes, and they have a segment, or had a segment, in which they played Dungeons and Dragons live, and it's sort of improvisational and comedic, and it's sort of split off into this sideshow called Harmon Quest. You might like to check it out, but yeah, Harmontown does the whole sort of D&D thing pretty well. And yeah, maybe something along those lines is something we could experiment in the future. There are many possibilities for what we could do with this Alt Swift thing, and I think there are indeed many possibilities for the whole sort of live streaming thing as well. So we'll continue to experiment and maybe try some weird shit in the future. Alright, so I think it's about time we conclude this episode. Thank you all for watching. There are links in the description for all the different platforms where you can get all Swifty Squad with the Swifty Squad. There's a Discord, there's a Facebook, there's a subreddit, there's all sorts of stuff. So thank you all, and have a lovely week. Cheers.